Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Universal, a podcast sponsored by the UWI that explores how organisations can foster neurodiversity in their workforce. And today I am joined by Wanda Deschamps, founder of Liberty Co. and self proclaimed inclusion revolutionist. Good morning, Wanda. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Erica. Thank you for having me.
It's no problem at all. And I think what would be great is if we could begin with learning a little bit more about your background and how you got involved with neurodiversity in the workplace.
So, I was diagnosed as a member of the neurodiverse population a month before my 47th birthday. So, that's the official story. However, for those listening, I'm sure they understand that even though I only received my diagnosis at that time, I, of course, was born neurodivergent. I just didn't know it. And I struggled in different ways throughout my life. And then what really hit home was midlife and the way I was struggling in the workplace. And our older son had received his diagnosis of autism in 2012. And then our younger son was going through an assessment. He received his diagnosis. And then at the same time, my mental health reached a crisis point, and the day after we received his diagnosis, a day or two after we received it, at a previously scheduled doctor's appointment, I to my own family physician, I would like my own psychological assessment. I think I have it too. And so we were able to move very quickly, and I received my own diagnosis on July 25th, 2017. I sought accommodation in the workplace. Unfortunately, I did not receive the supports that I required. So I ended up leaving that position and founding my own firm, Liberty Co., which you've mentioned. And it's interesting because I had worked in the charitable sector for 25 years, both as a consultant and as an institutional professional. And I thought Liberty Co. was going to service the charitable sector because that was my background. That's what I knew. And then at the same time, I was processing my own diagnosis and started to be encouraged to share my own story. And so I did, and I reoriented Liberty Co. actually before COVID, made that decision, and then officially announced during 2020 that I was reorienting to, as you mentioned, focus on neurodiverse employment. So there's a lot more I could say, and perhaps there's things that will be unearthed during our discussion today. However, for our listeners, that's in essence why I'm now doing what I'm doing.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think the more and more we delve into neurodiversity, we see a lot of late diagnosis in a lot of people, and I think it's becoming a lot more common in the workplace for people to be um, going through that process and getting their own diagnosis. Um, but just quickly, before we kind of get into the Liberty Co services and purpose, how would you characterize the D&I industry right now, specifically when it comes to neuroinclusion?
Well, DEI is definitely growing. And perhaps this is a way to segue to a bit more about why I've been able to do some of the things that I've been able to do. When I left my position and I founded Liberty Co. around very early 2019, I did notice, even though Liberty Co. was not oriented to neurodiverse employment at that time, I did notice that there was more and more happening in terms of neurodiverse employment and neurodiverse inclusion. And, as I mentioned, I was processing my own diagnosis, which I had only received in 2017. So this was all still new to me. And I was noticing more and more about neurodiverse employment, especially in technology and in some of the big tech companies that would be well known to our listeners. So I guess that would be point one, is that there was momentum, and I was very interested to see that. I guess we could move right now to, you mentioned DEI, and that is so much of what is still used in terms of programs and approaches and strategies, DEI or IGE. I want to add that A always. So I work from the IDEA framework, which is inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And the A is still often not there. We can talk a bit more as to why. However, I think for now to say that for me, it's never DEI or IDE, it's IDEA. And I know some folks may think, well, you don't need to have the A. Accessibility is part of inclusion. And some of it is, but not fully. Being accessible is really different from being inclusive. And if we're going to be truly accessible, whether we're talking about the workforce or society generally or anything specific, yeah, that accessible part is really important. And then, so just I guess a third point I'd add, and finally is, so we're still not there. So we've seen a lot more about DEI and IDE, even from when I first started noticing these aspects of neurodiverse inclusion around 2018. So we've moved forward. Some of that is to do with COVID. And some of that is to do with the resurgence of movements such as Black Lives Matter that happened during COVID. So it's still a matter of adding that A though, because for instance, even if we look at Black Lives Matter or Indigenous reconciliation or other key movements, members of equity seeking groups experience neurodivergence. So accessibility and disability and neurodiversity intersect with all aspects of individual identity, whether it be race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. And I wouldn't say that we're thinking completely along those lines yet, but discussions like this morning certainly push us forward. So eager
Absolutely.
to move forward in this with you.
And let's just return back to Liberty Co then. So you launched this consulting business that's helping companies to increase the participation level of neurodiverse people in the workforce. What problem had you identified in the industry that Liberty Co addresses?
So one thing that came to me fairly quickly was that even though I had been undiagnosed, and I was so grateful to receive my diagnosis, and even though I had struggled, largely without that diagnosis, or because I should say I did not have a diagnosis, I was still one of the lucky ones. So the more I processed my own reality and the more I read and learned and access resources about neurodiversity generally and autism specifically, I realized, yes, to have been employed throughout my career, I was one of the lucky ones, and that the majority of the neurodiverse population was actually unemployed or underemployed. And so I realized that having a diagnosis is a privilege. And beyond my diagnosis, I have a lot of privilege. I have a post-secondary education. My spouse has a post-secondary education. We have had good jobs. We have access to resources. We have supports. I realized, Wanda, you need to take your privilege and use it as a platform to share information that other people might not know about the neurodiverse population, especially as it relates to employment and the barriers. And you need to do this to create smoother paths for others, because that's really incumbent on you now that you have your diagnosis. And I was being heard. People were listening to me. And I realized that because I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons I reoriented was because I was encouraged to share my own story, and it was resonating. And so I realized, yes, so you really need to do this one. So the long and short of it is I'm committed to helping remove some of the barriers that neurodivergent individuals experience, whether it be right from the moment that they see a job posting and they feel excluded, to feeling isolated and excluded in the workplace, even when they have a position. And then beyond that, removing some of the stereotypes, really busting those stereotypes around neurodiversity only belongs in technology, or it only belongs in analyst positions and certain types of positions, and not right across organizations and in all kinds of different sectors.
And so, can I just clarify which markets is it? Is it just North America and Canada at the moment that you're kind of serving?
So I've worked across Canada. I'm really fortunate to be able to say I've worked from the east to the west. And I have collaborated with organizations beyond Canada, so in the US and in Europe to some degree. However, I'm eager to do more outside of Canada and beyond in other markets, because that's another thing about disability and neurodiversity is that it's global. So it's not just neurodivergent individuals struggling to enter and retain positions in Canada or any one region in Canada, or no, it's a global issue. That's the downside. The upside is that there's global forces at play that are working to address this issue. So, especially given the proliferation of technology, why not work beyond, your own region? Yes, I'm happy to do that.
Awesome. And for organizations that are looking at increasing the participation of neurodivergence in their workplace, what kind of services is it that you would provide them?
So just going back to what I said a moment ago about some of the barriers, and they can begin right from the moment a neurodivergent individual reads a job description, for a number of reasons. So for that, the solutions that I provide start there as well. So everything from assistance with job postings to ensure that they're neurodiverse inclusive, to the job search process, to hiring and retention strategies. Those are some of the things that I work with organizations on. And I also work in the area of inclusive leadership, because I really believe, and some of this is based on my own experience. However, some of is certainly beyond my own experience too, and just realities that we're aware of, is that if neuro-inclusive practices are not demonstrated from the top, often they will flounder. It's wonderful to have supportive colleagues, and that is certainly something that I partner with organizations on allyship, and why that's key. However, we really need these neurodiverse friendly techniques demonstrated from the top, and beyond that, rolled out from the top. And to give our listeners some specific examples, so for instance, a neurodiverse action plan and the components that are measurable and actionable, it's often leadership that would sponsor that. Also ensuring that neurodiversity is included within policies, whether they be human resource policies or other policies. So yes, I am focused on increasing the participation level of the neurodiverse employees. I say that I specialize in the areas of inclusive leadership, employee retention, and entrepreneurial thinking. There's a lot more I could say about some of the good fortune I've had of working on projects, but I hope that's helpful to give a sense about some of the things I do.
Absolutely. And from your experience of, working with organizations, is there a key issue or a number of common issues that you find organizations struggle with when it comes to neurodiversity?
I don't know if this is a struggle. It's back to what I think we opened with, and that is it's just still not a consideration. So many organizations that are active in IDE or EDI, they haven't added that A. So they're not considering neurodiversity as part of their overall strategy program approach. So I would say step before struggle is even to consider it. And then maybe, moving a bit to struggle, it's where do I begin? It can be so overwhelming. And so that's why when I have the chance, I say, yes, so there's large technology corporations that have launched neurodiverse hiring programs or autism hiring programs. I will point to some of those and speak to them. However, I never tell an organization you need to launch a neurodiverse hiring program, because you don't. You don't. It's a matter of understanding neurodiverse friendly techniques and of overall inclusion and the tenets of overall inclusion. And then it's a matter of embedding those. And what's good for neurodiverse inclusion is actually good for everyone. So some of the most fundamental techniques, straightforward, open, honest, two-way communication, building trust, being open-minded, suspending judgments. You're probably thinking, Erica, oh, those are not limited to the neurodiverse population. Those are good. And that's the thing. And that is part of what's a real joy for me in my work is when I work with organizations and I get that reaction. And I've had that reaction and I had a leader, a technology leader say to me, yeah, I had this training for neurodiversity. And then I realized training for neurodivergent employees, I should be doing this with all my employees all the time. And yeah, what benefits neurodiverse inclusion? It benefits everyone.
Yes, I have to agree. A lot of the conversations I've been having recently have been around, how designing or creating a workplace for the extreme actually benefits the all in a lot of cases. But even these are very simple things that, as you said, people realize that why am I not doing this anyway? Because everyone benefits from these kinds of practices. Um, so I'd like to get into a little bit more detail about the idea framework. For those who perhaps don't know what that is, could you explain what it is and how it might be used?
Yeah, so again, IDEA stands for inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And I say that accessibility really underpins it all because it's one thing to have an inclusive, diverse, and equitable workforce, for example, but if it's not accessible, then it's not enterable, reachable, and approachable for everyone. And if we could shift our thinking that way, then we would include so many. And so we've traditionally come from the standpoint of thinking of accessibility from a disability standpoint and removing physical barriers. However, given the majority of disabilities are invisible, and neurodivergence is invisible. You cannot see my different brain makeup from the neurotypical population. I can guarantee that it does exist. So if we think of removing barriers from that standpoint, then it really provokes new thinking about neurodiversity, disability, and accessibility. And so much of what is designed for disability and accessibility has been adopted by the mainstream, such as buttons for assistive devices, for entry for assistive devices. People couldn't imagine them because they're so helpful for baby strollers or shopping carts. And when it comes to other forms of technology, such as phones and enlarging text, it's good, yes, for those who may have areas that those are particularly helpful for, whether it due to sight or sound. However, good for the neurodivergent population and often, and good for many, closed captioning developed for those who may be hard of hearing, really helpful for those, for instance, for whom English is the second language, and can be helpful for the neurodiverse population because sometimes we may need points reinforced during presentation or a discussion or whatever. So there's so much more I could say about IDEA. However, I hope that's helpful. And then I guess maybe just one more thing is sheer numbers. So we're looking at about 1 in 5 to 7 individuals globally is neurodivergent, so 15 to 20% of the world's population, and underdiagnosis persists. Look at me. I was neurodivergent, of course, my whole life. I didn't know it. And there's so many more Wandas out there. And then I realized not everyone considers neurodiversity a form of disability. I do. Please know that in doing so, I come from a strengths-based approach. And so then we're looking at approximately 15% of the world's population as persons who identify as persons with disabilities. So that's 1.3 billion, and in Canada, 6.2 million. So practical reasons too. Lot more I could say about ID. I'm very passionate about it. However, I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely. And when it's applied to an organization, I suppose what organizational leaders want to know is, what are the benefits for the organization as a whole? What are the gains for them?
Well, right back to what's good for neurodiverse inclusion is good for everyone. So, an increased sense of belonging for your employees, especially because, as we discussed, neurodivergence intersects with other aspects of individual identity. So, and again, it's invisible. So, for instance, for your gender diverse employees who are neurodivergent, for instance, neurodiverse friendly techniques could especially benefit them. However, they are good for everyone. However, beyond that, because of what's really behind these basic tenets of neurodiverse inclusion, yeah, an overall sense of morale, belonging. Again, back to some of the practical side, neurodiverse employees can be more loyal, higher retention rates, and we see this with disability as well across the board. That means a lower cost in terms of hiring and retaining efforts can be so expensive. However, if you have lower turnover, not only is it lower cost, again, that can go to boosting morale. Um, not always, and we do want to be recognized for our individual characteristics and traits, and first and foremost as individuals. However, again, and if you look at things more broadly, neurodiverse inclusion can lead to more creativity and innovation. Often we are very creative individuals, and so it can provide, yeah, different ways of thinking, different solutions in the workplace that might otherwise go overlooked or untapped if neurodiversity is not part of your overall workplace diversity. And then maybe this might be a time to raise. That's one of the reasons why neurodiverse inclusion is so important across all sectors and fields and across all levels within organizations, because representation really matters. And having neurodivergent individuals not only in junior or middle positions, but in senior positions as well, in terms of differences in way decisions are approached, and overall strategies are embedded. That can lead to greater innovation and creativity as well. And then, of course, you're more likely to disclose if you know a neurodivergent leader. You as a neurodivergent employee may be more likely to disclose because you see someone, you see yourself, quote unquote, represented in the leadership ranks. So yeah, a lot more about the benefits of neurodiversity in the workplace, but those are some.
So you're also regularly engaged as a speaker on this topic of neurodiversity in the workplace. Um, what do you find people are most interested in learning about, and why do you think that is?
Well, people are interested in my own story. So what I often do is when I'm brought in for a session, neurodiversity session, and I offer them in different forms. So, longer, shorter, virtual, in person, hybrid. I offer case studies. So I'm brought in to speak different kinds of organizations in different formats based on their goals and their objectives and where they are on their journey, and of course their budget. Common denominator is that I do share some of my own story. There's often a lot of interest in that, I think, for a number of reasons. Even if someone's not neurodivergent, they feel they can relate because whether it's their own differences from the mainstream population, or whether it's those of a family member or just, general experience. They feel a connection, like, oh, I struggled and I felt excluded in the workplace too. Either I never knew why, or I did know why, but it's not that it made me feel any better. There's a common feeling there. Another thing that comes up is, yeah, back to what we were saying before, is that often they can start out thinking, okay, this is a lot more complicated than it actually is. And then they realize, oh my goodness, these are simple steps and techniques that we can adopt. I remember at the end of a talk once, a startup said, I'm going to get all my employees a pair of noise canceling headphones. No, they didn't have millions of employees. They were able to do that. But even still, like, that is one example. They said, I just know that this could be good for everyone. And then I guess another thing, Erica, that's probably important to highlight is that some of the things that are key for neurodiverse inclusion, and for disability inclusion, individuals had been championing for years, in some cases decades, and had been denied because they were perceived as too costly or inconvenient for employers. And then what came to light early in COVID? What would be really helpful? Flexibility in terms of hours and location, increased assistive devices, customized communication to suit individuals, especially with their supervisor. What had individuals been championing for years for neurodiverse inclusion, disability inclusion, flexibility in terms of hours and location, increased focus on communication, especially with supervisors, and increased technological supports. And so it's really unfortunate, what we had been asking for years, and in many cases had been denied. Not only did a lot of organizations come to realize, oh my goodness, we should be adopting these. Again, they're good for everyone, and they've improved productivity. That's the biggie. And, back to your question about, am I local or am I national or am I global? Increasing productivity is global. I mean, who, no matter where you are, wherever you live, whatever country, whatever corner of the world, is going to go up and say, no, I don't want to increase our teens' productivity. So, yeah, it's really amazing. So much of life is timing. And you asked me, Wanda, how did Liberty Co get started, and why and when, and so several things I was able to harness the reins, and several things I had no control of. I never would have asked for, of course, or wanted a global pandemic. It's been horrible, and it's been horrible for so many who had less to begin with. If there's a silver lining, let's think of the spotlight that it's put on inequity, and what globalization and the proliferation of technology can do to reduce inequity. And this is one area.
For those who are struggling to find those actionable, effective, and sustainable ways of bringing neurodiversity into the workplace, what would you recommend their first steps be?
First step can be a number of different ones given the size and the scope of your organization. So if you're rather large and you have employee resource groups, do you have a neurodiversity employee resource group, or connected to disability, however that fits with your organization? And it's really important to hear from your neurodivergent employees as to whether or not that fits, or if it works more as a standalone from disability, for whatever. Again, if it's maybe medium to larger size organization, a neurodiverse action plan. Now, of course, that can work within a smaller organization. It would just be scaled accordingly. Building neurodiversity into your job postings. So if you're saying that you welcome applications underrepresented groups, is neurodiversity there? Building neurodiversity into your workplace communications overall, connected to employment, beyond employment. Again, these are things you're doing anyway, when I talk about, say, building neurodiversity into applications, it's one word, neurodiversity. So you're building the applications anyway. Add neurodiversity. That does not cost you anymore. And then there's a number of things in terms of recruitment, around interviews, making your interviews more inclusive, sending interview questions in advance. It's good for everyone. It can be a real barrier for some neurodivergent individuals if they get to the interview and being asked a lot of open-ended questions. Send them in advance, and also focus your hiring on competence. So what will the job be like on the day-to-day? And how can individual strengths show in the interview that are relevant for the day-to-day? There's so much more I could say, but I think what's coming across is that some of these are low cost, some of these are no cost, some of these are minimal cost, and even if you are in a position where you can make a larger investment, whether it be in the plan or the resource, the benefits in the long term, first of all in the short term and then in the long term, will outweigh the cost of your investment.
And of course, they can get in touch with you if they want some more guidance and help in bringing that into their organisation. We can't forget to mention that. You also advocate for women, for neurodivergent women, and that other kind of area of intersectionality of diversity. Can I ask you why you think that's also an important topic to acknowledge and discuss?
I would go back again to a combination of my own experiences. And then when I began to process my own diagnosis and I got in touch with resources and research and other areas that could really help me understand, I realized that A, I wasn't alone, and B, that there was really something there. So unfortunately, ableism is a reality. Unfortunately, discrimination, stigma, bias, these are all realities for the neurodiverse population. And then you mentioned intersectionality. And then, yes, when you look at other areas of individual identity, it's worse. It's a bleaker picture. So then I realized I was able to put together, I had experienced ableism and I had experienced sexism. Unfortunately, I experienced a lot of sexism by other women. And yeah, I didn't know why. And so, again, that's an issue. It's not just only a matter of discrimination. It's a matter of neurodiversity has been researched from a boys and a man's perspective and from a white boys and man's perspective. So it's problematic within our systems and our structures. It's beyond any one individual and any one individual being discriminatory. So okay, that's the issue. What can I do about it? So I participate in research. Broadly in terms of autism or neurodiversity in the workplace and beyond the workplace as much as I can. Specifically, I am a participant and I'm an advisor on a research project out of University of Toronto and CAMH here in Canada. And it's about autistic women's experiences in the workplace. And I read and I promote as much as I can neurodivergent women like Charlotte Valeur, who founded the Institute of Neurodiversity. Helping people understand like why do we have this double-edged sword of ableism and sexism, how it manifests itself and what we can do about it. And then I say I do everything I can to support women, and of course, including neurodivergent women like Charlotte Valeur and some. However, beyond that, supporting all women, because something that I noticed, and I think I did just mention that what was particularly hurtful was the mistreatment and the bullying and the harassment I experienced from other women. Let's work together to change that by supporting other women. And again, that would be an example of, overall inclusion. That's good for everyone.
And I think we should also mention the work that you're doing for Women for Work. Um, how does that kind of fit into what it is that you're doing?
So the hashtag is Women for Women, and it's about supporting all women, as I just mentioned, because I believe that sexism will cease a lot earlier if women support other women. So that's Women for Women broadly. And then some examples of how I apply it are in terms of neurodiversity, what I just mentioned. So being involved in research. I've also I've had the good fortune of working on some specific projects related to women's entrepreneurship and how it intersects with disability and neurodiversity. So I've done that at the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub here in Canada. Women's Enterprise Organizations of Canada. I've worked on specific projects there. And so those would be some examples of, how my work has come to life. And we have a long way to go in terms of research, in terms of looking at neurodiversity and disability and in different forms, and not just kind of blanket approaches. So I try to do what I can, and this does come to life in terms of my work with Liberty Co. And again, sharing my own story. Sometimes after I facilitate a session, people will say, they never heard an autistic woman speak before, or they never interacted with an openly autistic woman. It's all boys and men they've interacted with, or they've heard about, or they've read the stories of. So it's a matter of, again, sharing my story that I'm able to do because of my privilege, to empower others, because I really do want a smoother path for others.
And with the Women for Women initiative, is there any way for organizations to get involved with that?
Absolutely. So the number one thing is follow the hashtag, use the hashtag, and make sure in terms of accessibility, it's capital W, so Women for Women. And then in your areas of neurodiversity and disability and autism, really consider gender. So when you have projects, when you're developing strategies and your approaches, your programs, make sure that they're not just from the perspective of neurodivergent men, and make sure that they're not just from the perspective in terms of leadership. If you're involving neurodivergent leaders, it's not just male neurodivergent leaders. So ensure that, there's gender inclusion as well. And yeah, again, that would be another example of it will increase overall inclusion.
Well, thank you for answering my questions, Wanda. Um, just before we finish, though, is there anything that we've not mentioned or touched on, or perhaps something you'd like the audience to take away that you'd like to address now?
I would encourage as many people who want to reach out to me, please do so. My website is at www.libertyco.ca. There's a contact form right there, also my email and all my contact information is right there. LinkedIn is the platform where I'm most active on social. So please follow me, reach out and connect with me. I also have a number of articles featured on my LinkedIn page, and they're included on my website as well. They're free to access. They are there, and there's a range, and I hope they're helpful. I also offer 30-minute complimentary meetings. So I always say I have 30 minutes for anyone you want to reach out and schedule. And then after that 30 minutes, we take it from there in terms of, a specific project the organization are working on. I have an article that's in the fall issue of a magazine, a bi-monthly Canadian magazine called Plants and Trusts. And so that is fresh. That's on my LinkedIn and on my website. And that is current. It touches on a number of things we've covered today, and it does include easy, actionable steps that organizations can take to build neurodiverse inclusion. So I hope that's helpful.
No, that sounds great, and I'll definitely be taking a look at that article, and seeing what it is that you're uh, kind of helping people to do and take that first step towards neuroinclusion. So yes, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk with me and sharing your insight. And I think this has been a really valuable conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, Wanda. Take care. Bye.
Bye, Erica.